first, in our history, what we can see is that all the great scholars, in fact, they were resisting power. We have today scholars of power, and we have scholars of the message. And the scholars of the message are resisting wrong power or autocratic power. And this is what we had in our history. We had scholars, we had trends within the Muslim majority countries were resisting. For example, colonialism. People saying, we are not going to accept you imposing onto us your values and your identity and your culture. So all the resistance to colonialism, the political colonialism as much as the economic colonialism were wrong. When, for example, even in Iran, what was said is millions of people taking into the street saying no to the American and say no to the dictator. This was before what we called and the so-called Arab Spring, by people saying we are not violent, but we are not going to accept oppression. So we had in our history a long history, and this is known even by the Western colonial power, saying the Muslims are very much resisting to not only our political presence, but our social presence and our cultural imperialism. Because it was not only a question of taking over political power, it was changing the minds. And how do you resist? This is the first thing, your educational system, the way you think about yourself, the way you define your identity. This is the first step. And then you come to the resistance that we had up to today, where you see now people taking into the street. What do they ask? They are asking justice, for dignity, for freedom, and this is what we have to celebrate. So the first step is this intellectual jihad, the intellectual resistance, and then the social one. And the first dimension of the social jihad or the social resistance is our educational system. The problem is our intellectual alienation and not getting the knowledge, not knowing. So you can have a good understanding of Islam and a very bad understanding of the world. And in fact, you are useless. You are not going to resist. And this is why, remember something which is important, and it's coming from an example in the West, Malcolm X, Malik Shabazz. He was in the ghetto. He started learning, he started reading even dictionary and trying to get the knowledge. And then he used the Islamic means. And in fact, he became dangerous when he came back from Al-Hajj, because he came with a universal understanding. Message. Yes, exactly. Not only black versus white, but just people versus exploiters and unjust people.
Which brings me to the question of the West. Because in the West, you find that Muslim communities in the West tend to be sort of, how shall I say, saddled with a version or an understanding of Islam that is more foreign to this environment. How do you see, for example, the role of cultural expressions in bridging gaps between Muslims and non-Muslims on the level of resistance to a general social inequality that affects both?
Yes, I think it's important for, by the way, for Western Muslims as well as for Muslims around the world now, to think twice about the meaning of resistance and the power of counterpower. It's in which way you resist today to the cultural imposition, the worldwide culture, the perception of your identity, and especially when you are in the West, you say, okay, who am I in the whole thing? What am I going, what is my added value? And then you think about the means that you have at your disposal to try to change this. And I would say that Western Muslims, for example, today they are facing injustice, they are facing discriminations, they are facing, and they have to be involved in social justice, and they have to be involved in social resistance. What I'm always saying to the, reminding the Muslims is, be careful. You are not only acting and behaving and resisting for your own sake. You are not serving only the Muslims. Serving humanity is to serve Islam.
Like Malcolm X was about.
Exactly. It's this. That's a very, and in fact, our added value as a resisting presence is to serve humanity, to serve justice, to be there and to be able to say, no, we're not going to accept this. Because racism is not only a black business. Racism or Islamophobia is not an Islamic business. It's a human business. It's a universal struggle. So we need to reconcile ourselves with the Islamic principles and to come with this understanding. What are the means that we have? I said education. And this is why I would say to Muslims in Muslim majority countries as well as Western Muslims, start with your own and personal education. Because what we have today with all these social networks, all these social media is rumors, less knowledge, more impressions. We need more knowledge, less emotions. This is the first resistance. The second, which is important also, I would say, is this involvement at the social level with all the people who are working for social justice, social solidarity, and dignity of human being. You know, very many people, when they are talking about my grandfather, Hassan al-Banna, rahimahullah, they will say, oh, you know, he was, you know, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, and especially in the West, they have a bad impression. And he said something to people who wanted to go to fight and to be killed for the sake fi sabilillah, for the sake of Allah. He said, you know what? It's very difficult to be killed in the way of God, but it's more difficult to live in the way of God.
Very nice.
Live. So it means stand up, struggle, be the one who is promoting justice. And this is also to sacrifice some of your, you know, time and money to be involved in the process. So this is why we need to be involved in this. And the third dimension is also all the means. You know, today we are in an entertainment culture, songs, music. It's not haram as long as your intentions are for the dignity of human being, for justice, and not to celebrate wasting your time, but to celebrate getting your dignity. This is where all these means today should be used, and this is also a social resistance and a non-violent resistance. And once again, we need to be clear, as much as we are for the Palestinians, as much as we are for all the Muslims, we are for all humans. We, by definition, Muslims are on the side of the oppressed.
Very essential. Now, where are we today in terms of this, this scenario, these steps? Are we being successful in it? Are we moving forward? Because it seems that our tendency to resist and to be social reformers being taken over or outstripped by more extremist elements in our community. What do we need to do for the future?
I think you are completely right, and there is a problem. We have a double problem. We are so obsessed with rules that, and the mainstream scholars today are speaking about halal, haram, this is right, this is wrong, that we are letting two things in the hands of people who are sometimes deviating from Islam. The first is that we don't speak enough about this inner jihad, which is spirituality. So in fact, it's part of Islam. We are not only going to, we need to talk about this spiritual, because when you are in a consumerist society, we need to reconcile yourself with your heart. So we need to bring back this dimension, respecting the rules, but deepening the understanding. On the other side, we are less courageous. We are confusing wisdom with giving up. No, wisdom is to never give up, but with the right means. So this is where we need to come with scholars and intellectuals who are at the same time knowledgeable and courageous. Courageous in order not to let some people saying it's by killing that we are right. No, it's by resisting that we are right. It's by celebrating dignity and being just, and not to go and to do whatever in the name of Islam to kill the non-Muslims, the kuffar, the way they are putting it. This is wrong. So I think that if we look at the very long history and we get a sense of the very deep trend within history, what we can see is Western Muslims, for example, and even in Muslim majority countries, what we saw 3 or 4 years ago in the Middle East is this, what I call not the spring, but the awakening, which is the name of our program. Awakening means that something is happening, something that, okay, we can do something. We